Tuesday's tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. This is Chelsea with your Tuesday's tips and tricks. We're going to be posting it a little late today, but if you've been outside or you've been looking at the weather this week, you will know that it's going to get cold. So we're going to talk to Nathaniel and find out whether we need to take all our plants inside. So I, for one, hope we don't have to, because I really don't want to have to take all these inside yet, especially now that it's nice out and I kind of can enjoy being out on my balcony while it's cooler instead of blazing hot. So I'll talk with Nathaniel. I'm gonna go get ready for work and then we will catch you in a couple hours. All right, I'm back. I'm here at Scenic with Nathaniel and we're gonna talk about
Whether or not we need to bring houseplants in and kind of what the process of bringing them in looks like.
So Nathaniel's going to go into a lot of detail about more than just houseplants, but we'll get the question answered.
Yeah. So we're just going to talk about whether or not we need to bring houseplants in and what that process looks like with the cooler weather coming. I think there's probably, just judging off of what I've seen in years past, there's probably going to be a lot of panic, like it's getting cold, we need to bring stuff in. And I don't think we need to panic or freak out. We have one night this week, which is tonight, that might, maybe drop below 50 degrees, maybe. And the rest of it's going to stay above 50. And as in a general rule, I don't worry about the majority of plants and coming in unless it's going to stay below 50 degrees for a prolonged period of time. So even if it drops down to 48 for just an hour or two, but your plants that you want to bring in are all up on your porch or your deck, so they get the heat radiating off the house that was there during the day, or they're sheltered from wind. I mean, it's probably several degrees warmer where the plants are sitting anyway. So I wouldn't panic or worry yet. We're still quite a ways from having to bring most things in. And you probably could get away with not bringing anything in yet if you didn't want to. But if you are concerned and you want the best optimal growth from your plant, there's a few species that probably would benefit from coming in, like the Calathea right here. They don't like it cold. They like it humid, warm, they like moisture, they don't like drafts, and they don't like cold. So if it's going to drop, if there's a chance of it dropping below 50, then I would say go ahead and bring your Calatheas inside if you're growing them out, you know, in the shade on your porch or balcony in your apartment or whatever. So go ahead and bring those in if it is going to potentially drop below 50, and just move them in for the winter at this point. Things like African violets, if you've grown these outside. Ours have been growing outside this summer and they've done really well. But they also don't like it cold, and they're more susceptible to rot when you water them when the temperature drops and gets fairly chilly. Even though they may not die or it may not even hinder their growth, but they are at higher risk in those 50s and 40s degrees temperatures of rotting out when you water them. So I'd go ahead and bring stuff like that in. But the majority of plants you don't need to worry about at this point in time. As far as moving a plant from outside to inside, one of the things that we can consider is transitioning from outside to indoors. Most of the plants are going to lose a lot of foliage when you bring them indoors, and there's no reason to panic about that. If you bring in the tropical hibiscus like this, it's going to drop leaves like mad. So don't panic, that's normal. Plants put on foliage that is adapted to the conditions in which they grow. Outdoors they face more wind, more harsh elements, more intense light, and so the foliage is much thicker and hardier than the foliage that would grow indoors, which means it doesn't really serve the plant its purpose when you move it into the house. Same thing, if you move a plant outside in the springtime, you may lose a lot of foliage. You don't need to panic. The plant will recover and put out new foliage, but just be prepared for that when you're transitioning, that you may end up losing leaves. One way to avoid loss of leaf or shocking the plant somewhat when you transition from outside to inside or vice versa is to acclimate them slowly, where we know during the day it's going to be plenty warm enough. We're going to be up in the 70s or 60s. We're fine to have them outside. But at night, we're dropping down into the 50s and 40s. Go ahead and move them in at night, and then put them out during the daytime. Especially like if you can come home over lunch and move them out, or if it's a warm morning. And if you do that, they'll transition more slowly, and you can slowly increase the amount of time you leave them inside and slowly decrease the amount of time you leave them outside. Some of us don't have the luxury. We live by ourselves and we don't have time for that. That's totally fine. You'll lose some leaves, the plant will be fine. So don't freak out if you do lose some foliage when you're transitioning your plant. Be aware of the difference between light and humidity. There's usually more humidity outdoors than there is in our houses. One way to combat that is you could get yourself a humidifier. You could do pebble trays with water. You can keep your plants in groupings like this as long as you have enough light in an area. As plants transpire, which means basically we know that water leaves through our skin when we're outside or just living our life. Plants have the same thing. Water leaves through the leaves, it travels up from the roots and leaves through the leaves. So if you put groups of plants together, that means they're all emitting a small amount of water vapor into the air, and they all benefit from that slight increase of humidity. There's a huge difference in lighting. You can put most plants in a south-facing window in the wintertime, and it's full sun exposure, but it's going through glass that filters UV, and they won't burn. You can put African violets in a south-facing window in the wintertime, and they'll be fine. Almost right against the glass, as long as it's not drafty and cold. But you put an African violet in a south side of your house outside in the summertime, it's going to fry. So there is a huge difference in lighting. Indoor light, even if it is the brightest light you have naturally, it is not the same as growing in full sun. It is like growing in shade for the most part. So especially as we go into fall and winter and the days get shorter and the sunlight's less intense. So be kind of aware of that, and there's ways to combat that as well. You can invest. Chelsea's getting ready to get a bunch of grow lights in. You can invest in grow lights. That's fine. If you don't, if it's your first time, or you're like me and you're too cheap to spend money on grow lights. Okay, I used to grow a lot of house plants and even tomatoes and peppers and things in my basement when I lived in Montana under just shop lights. It works. It works just fine. You can, if you don't mind looking at something that's not necessarily beautiful as far as a light fixture goes, you can use like just a regular dome clamp light from the hardware store and clamp that puppy up on your fridge above your monstera that you brought in from your porch, or your hibiscus, and get you a little 5,000 Kelvin or higher. That's a rating on the light bulb. It should say it on the packaging, 5,000 K or above. That's full daylight spectrum. Get you one of those for really cheap at Walmart, screw it in there, plug it in, and you're good to go. That's plenty sufficient for the average plant to do pretty well under. You can certainly invest in better lights and have even better results, but if you're cheap like me, or you don't have the extra funds but you want to grow plants indoors over the winter, there's ways to get around that.
So what plants are worth bringing in, and what plants should we just be like, well, you did your thing and you're done?
So it depends on how much work you want to put into it. Hibiscus can be grown indoors. I've done it before, but they need a lot of light, and if you have a dark house, that means you're going to have to invest in lighting. And I would say that's one where it would be worth going beyond just the basic shop lights or LED 5,000K Walmart bulbs. I would get an actual grow bulb, and not a Walmart grow bulb. Those pink ones are just ugly to look at. Get some nice one, you know, if you have to get on Amazon. Hillside Feed and Seed, if you want to buy local, sells grow lights.
And if you think about it, you could either get rid of this plant and spend money to get it next year, or spend a little bit less money probably and get a decent grow light, and then keep the one you already have.
So the hibiscus, I think, you usually pay enough for it and you get enough enjoyment, and it will grow indoors, that it's worth the effort if you want to put the effort in. If not, I know there's a lot of people that treat them like annuals. Obviously your house plants are all worth bringing in. Most of them can be grown without supplemental lighting in most homes, as long as you are intentional about where you place them.
And you don't live in my house.
Yeah. Things like your basic cheap annuals, like this is end of the season here at the nursery, so it's real leggy. This isn't worth saving. Just don't save your big pot of sweet potato vines. If it's a cheap annual, let it die. And that goes for most vegetables too. And for most of us, we're not set up to grow tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers all season long in our basement. If you want to go that route, you certainly can. But for most of us, we're not set up for it. The investment isn't worth it, especially when you can buy $2.50, $3, $4 vegetables next year. Geraniums are a cheap annual. This one, again, it's the end of the season, needs cleaned up. Geranium is an annual you can get cheaply, readily, easily. However, they grow super easily in the house. So if you want to save a cheap annual and you're attached to some of them, these are worth saving. They will grow phenomenally in the house. They probably will quit blooming, but they'll grow really well and with very little effort. So one annual that's worth it, but most annuals I wouldn't save them. Since we do water gardens here at Scenic, pond plants, it's not worth trying to save your water hyacinths. They're very hard to keep alive. They need very warm, and when I say very warm, they want like probably a water temperature that's 70 to 80 degrees, and then a lot of sun. They don't like it cold at all. So when we get them in the spring even, they sit here for a few weeks until the water gets warm and just sit and float. And people buy them, but they don't really grow until we get hot. And our greenhouse, they don't survive the winter. It doesn't stay warm enough in there. So a lot of your floating pond plants, your cheaper pond plants, you ought to just treat like annuals in your flower pots and replace them every year. They're only $4 a piece and they multiply like crazy, so it's worth just letting them go. If you want to do edibles inside, herbs are a good candidate. This is a rosemary. Mint does really well indoors, so does basil. Herbs are very easy to grow without supplemental lighting. If you've got a nice sunny east or west or south facing window, they'll do great for you and grow easily. I wouldn't try to bring in your vegetables unless, like I said, you're going to set up a whole system just for that purpose. It's just not worth it. It's difficult to get fruit to produce inside. You get a lot of pest problems, a lot of weed growth, so I wouldn't mess with those. Also consider what plants you can wait to bring in for a long time. So succulents can go really cold. I don't mean freezing. I would bring them in before it freezes, but you can pretty much go right down to just above freezing without any ill effects on your succulents. They can take it, they'll do fine with it, and you'll actually get more color in the wintertime if you let them get cold than if you just bring them in before they get cold. That's a general rule. There's probably some exceptions, but for the most part, they can handle it.
So let's just look at some of these. We've got a snake plant in here. Technically, that's kind of a succulent, yeah? How long?
Yeah, I would bring it in before it gets us, like, jades could probably take it colder than a snake plant, although they can handle pretty cool temperatures as long as you keep them dry. If you just watered and it's going to be 40 degrees every night for a week, maybe bring them in because they might not dry out fast enough and then you could get some rot. Like agaves, you could go down to the 20s on some species. I wouldn't push that unless you know what kind of agave you have. If you don't, bring it in right at freezing. So yeah, succulents definitely can take it cold.
Now this week it's supposed to be pretty much rainy all week, so that might change your mind. I don't know where your plants are. My balcony is going to get real wet, so I might have to take in more than I initially would. But I'll just play it by ear and see. So I'll guess. I know I need to take in my calathea.
Yeah.
I'll probably take in my African mask because those things are finicky as heck.
They like it warm. Yeah, colocasias, alocasias really like it warm. And then really quickly, some things you need to cut back. This, the wind broke it over, but these are actually just cut leaves off of a black stem taro, which is a colocasia.